our southern border. And tonight we're going to discuss the state of our national security with two people who know it well, Florida Congresswoman Cammack and Congressman Michael Waltz. Thanks for both being here. Congressman Waltz, I want to start with you. Earlier this week, President Biden met with President Putin regarding Russia amassing these thousands and thousands of troops on the Ukrainian border, and it's amid reports that Russia is preparing for another invasion of Ukraine. Now, the readout of the call from the White House says that, quote, the U.S. and our allies would respond with strong economic and other measures in the event of a military escalation. So, first, is that a strong enough worded statement? Second, I think based on the last time that Russia did this, they don't feel any serious consequences. And third, would we do anything differently now in terms of the military?
Well, Sean, it shouldn't surprise anybody, the timing of all of this on Putin's part. Number one, it's happening in the wake of Afghanistan. Leading Russian think tanks have decried American weakness there, and these are think tanks tied to the Kremlin and to Putin himself, so they're certainly listening. Number two, they got away with it in 2014. Obama and Biden literally threw blankets and MREs at the problem rather than lethal aid, and the same team that was around Obama is now around Biden. Putin thinks he can get away with it. And then number three, it's happening in the wake of Nord Stream pipeline. The construction is finished. All the Germans have to do is flip the switch. And with that, Putin will be able to starve Ukraine in the middle of winter of gas and heat for their homes, and our allies in Eastern Europe like Poland. Meanwhile, they'll be able to hold Germany and Western Europe hostage because now they have the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that bypasses everything else. And look, Biden is bringing, I think, talking points to a gunfight. And what we need to see is lethal aid moving now. And it needs to be the type of lethal aid the Ukrainians have been asking for, namely anti-aircraft systems like Stingers and anti-ship systems that can affect Putin's Navy in the Black Sea. Because what we have to do is begin rising the military cost right now, not after they invade, but before, in order to prevent the invasion in the first place.
Wow.
Right.
Congresswoman Cammack, we had President Trump on our show on Monday, and here's what he had to say about Biden and the administration announcing a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Winter Beijing Olympics in just a few weeks. Watch.
It will have no impact. Jimmy Carter tried it, and it really fizzled. I wouldn't do that. I do many other things, but I wouldn't do that. You're hurting the athlete. I think it's a knock on the Olympics themselves. Who wants to do that? And remember, it's been tried. It was tried by Jimmy Carter. So they're doing a diplomatic thing. What does that mean? That means that Biden doesn't have to make a trip, I guess.
Okay, so there's a lot of opinions on if athletes should be allowed to go or not. What's your take, Congresswoman?
You know, the fact that the International Olympic Committee has allowed Beijing the honor of hosting the Olympics and what all comes with that, the economic impact, that to me is just absolutely insane. With the human rights abuses that they have logged and continue to engage in, the fact that they are now being put into the international spotlight, being allowed to host these games is a slap in the face to every country that has bid in this process and does it the right way. What does it say if we honor China or give China this honor and then just turn a cheek to all of their abuses when it comes to human rights? I mean, they have concentration camps, for Pete's sakes. And for Biden to say, we're just not going to send a diplomatic representative, I mean, I think my friend and colleague Mike Waltz said it best. I mean, it's basically talking points in a gunfight. He did the very bare minimum of what was to be expected when there was so much more that we could do to be forceful in pushing back about what this means not just the Olympics themselves, but what comes after this. Because we both know, all of us know, that China's aggression will not stop. They're literally being checked right now because they have the opportunity to host these Olympics. There were missed opportunities for the United States and for the global community to really hold China accountable. And to me, that's just a shame.
You know, it's funny because yeah, go ahead, Congressman.
Can I just jump in there? I think Representative Cammack's absolutely right. The IOC should be ashamed of themselves. And something that gets lost in the conversation is the IOC who says, we don't do politics and we're just going to ignore not only the human rights abuses, but unleashing COVID on the world, killing 5 million people and covering it up. The IOC is going to ignore that. But yet they boycotted any Olympics from happening in South Africa over apartheid and banned the South African Olympic team from participating in any Olympics for 30 years. So, of course, you know, like a lot of these athletes and like these corporations, you know, they want to talk woke social justice on the one hand, but then they want to ignore everything China's doing because it's padding their balance sheet. They're making money. And the hypocrisy is rife. We should be calling it out at every turn, especially these Olympic sponsors like Coca-Cola and Nike and Procter & Gamble and others who, again, want to preach about Georgia's voter integrity laws, but then want to support the genocide Olympics that's about to happen in Beijing. And Representative Cammack's also right. Dictators love the Olympics. We all know what Germany did after 1936. But importantly, Putin invaded the Ukraine last time, just 2 months after the 2014 Sochi Olympics. So I really fear for Taiwan. This is a check the box from Biden. They ought to be taking a much stronger stand. But once again, we have weakness at the White House, and the whole world knows it.
Not only that, but look, let's be honest. We're waiting till a few weeks before these things start. He's been in office 10 months. This should have and could have been an issue instead of waiting to the 11th hour when, frankly, there are only so many things you can do. But, Congresswoman, I want to follow up on this because Congressman Waltz just talked about these woke companies and everything that's happening. And your delegation, both of your senators are actually taking some real action. Senator Marco Rubio is pushing hard for inclusion into the National Defense Authorization Act, something that would basically say anything made by Uyghurs, products that would be considered slave labor. And he said, quote, they are blocking it, meaning other people, other members, because major American corporations benefit from factories that use slave labor. I mean, Congressman Waltz just talked about this. Then you've got your other senator, Rick Scott, telling the NBA, I want to sit down and talk to you. Same thing. But here's the thing. Everybody wants to talk tough on China until it's time for action. I give both of your senators tons of credit for actually doing this. But among your colleagues, do you find that the rhetoric is tough, but the action is not?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned the NDAA. Of course, you know, this week is a big week for the NDAA. We're looking at the Senate taking action and going through the conference process and getting resolution on this critical must-pass bill. It is absolutely imperative that we fund the troops, but so many other important initiatives like just what you were talking about there, Sean. And you talk about how China has really taken advantage of slave labor. And we know that. Yes, it is very hypocritical for these companies that are so woke. You know, we see their corporate boards subscribe to these ESGs where they have all these new woke policies, so long as they only deal with domestic policies. Because if it's overseas and it deals with slave labor or trafficking, anything like that, they just want to turn a blind eye and disregard. But our colleagues, I know, who have been for the NDAA, and there is quite a handful of us, we have been with this process, fighting for it from the very beginning, working to make it better, working to get conservative provisions built in, making sure that this gets across the finish line. There's been a lot of talk across the full spectrum, but we have some colleagues that do talk a big game, but they don't actually put forward the effort to make sure that these important provisions are included. But I'm confident that with representatives like Representative Waltz and myself and many others, we're going to get this thing across the finish line. That also, by the way, gets China out of our military supply chain, which is a huge, huge issue that we have let go for too long. We need to get China out of the DoD. It's long overdue.
Well,
hey, Sean, I did get Senator Rubio is making a great effort. It would ban all government purchases of anything made with slave labor in Western China. I don't know, frankly, that he's going to get it in because the Democrats are beholden to these corporations that unbelievably are lobbying against it. But I was able to get into the House version a ban of the Defense Department buying any materials made out of there. Coca-Cola gets its sugar in Western China. Nike gets its cotton. And there's all kinds of, Intel gets many of its chip supplies from Western China. That language is in the House version. I think we're going to vote it out tonight, and that's going to send a real shot over the bow of all of these companies that, again, want to preach social justice, but only when it applies to the United States. And meanwhile, it is our money. It's taxpayer dollars and American dollars that are fueling the Chinese buildup. It's fueling their ships, their launches into space, their Belt and Road Initiative. And enough is enough. It's time for some corporate patriotism when it comes to our national security. But we're seeing Wall Street, Hollywood, the sports industry, you name it, politics are drunk on the Chinese dollar. President Xi knows it. And historians are going to look back and say, you funded this Frankenstein that now intends to defeat you.
Let me
go ahead, Sean. Go ahead. Yeah. I was just going to say, we don't have a ton of time left, so I want to just, if I can, see if we can suss this out a little. Let me ask you, yes or no, would you send the U.S. team to China, Congresswoman?
No.
Congressman
Sean,
Waltz?
I sponsored a bill back in February demanding the IOC move the games or we go to a full boycott. And I would ask these athletes if the United States government was putting 1 million Muslims in concentration camps, would they demand to compete? We know they wouldn't. They would be out protesting. So why is it okay in China? Black Lives Matter. I hear you. But you know what? Muslims.
So let me ask you this. Let me just real quick follow up. You mentioned, should any company, any U.S. company that, whether it's Nike or Coca-Cola, get any U.S. government money if they are, in the case of doing business in China and using slave labor? I think I know your answer, Congressman. Yes or no?
That's an absolutely not. We tried to get that provision in too, and the Democrats knocked it out.
Congresswoman?
That's a hell no for me, Sean. It's pretty cut and dry.
Wow. Well, thank you for what you're both doing to stand up for what is happening in China and get the word out and what you're doing in Congress. Appreciate your time tonight, Congresswoman Cammack and Congressman Waltz.
Thank you.